For most of history, if you said the government was secretly experimenting on its own citizens, poisoning people for a study, or planning to stage a fake attack to start a war, you'd be laughed out of the room, called paranoid, called a conspiracy theorist. Here's the uncomfortable part. Every single one of those things actually happened. Not allegedly, not according to leaked documents that some people believe, admitted, declassified, testified to under oath in front of Congress. This isn't a video about theories. This is a video about the ones that stopped being theories. The moment the paperwork got declassified, and the government had no choice but to say, yes, that happened. And once you see the pattern across all of them, you start to understand something a lot scarier than any single case on its own. Let's start with one of the most disturbing documents to ever get declassified by the U.S. government. In 1962, a group of senior military officials drafted a plan, not a rumor, not a leak, an actual signed formal proposal called Operation Northwoods. The plan was simple and horrifying. Stage fake terrorist attacks on American soil, including hijackings, bombings, even the appearance of American casualties, and blame it on Cuba. The idea was to manufacture enough public outrage to justify a full military invasion of Cuba, all without Cuba actually doing anything. The proposal included staging a fake attack on a U.S. Navy base, sinking a boat full of Cuban refugees, even faking the shoot-down of a passenger plane using a fake empty aircraft while broadcasting a fabricated distress call. For decades, if you said something like this existed, you'd be dismissed instantly. Then, in 1997, the documents were declassified as part of the JFK Assassination Records Collection. The plan was never carried out. President Kennedy personally rejected it, but it was real, it was written, it was signed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The government planned to kill its own citizens to justify a war. And for 35 years, anyone who said that out loud was called insane. The next one sounds like it belongs in a science fiction movie. For years, it was treated exactly like one. An urban legend, a story people told at parties. The CIA tried to invent mind control. Sure, right. It's called MKUltra, and it ran for over 20 years, starting in 1953. The CIA secretly dosed people with LSD, sometimes without their knowledge or consent, including prisoners, mental patients, and even their own employees, to study whether they could break down a person's mind and control it. They experimented with hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological torture, searching for ways to extract information or, in some versions of the program, create something close to a programmable human being. We only know the scope of it because in 1973, the CIA director at the time ordered almost all the MKUltra files destroyed, almost all. A box of financial records was accidentally missed, and it survived. In 1977, those surviving documents were found through a Freedom of Information Act request, and a Senate committee held hearings where CIA officials had to publicly confirm the program existed. An entire government agency ran human experiments in secret for 2 decades, and it only became public because somebody forgot to shred one box. This next one isn't about spies or war plans. It's arguably worse because of how long it was allowed to continue in plain sight. Starting in 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service began a study in Tuskegee, Alabama. They recruited hundreds of black men, many of them poor sharecroppers, telling them they were receiving free health care for what they called bad blood. What was actually happening? The men had syphilis, and researchers wanted to observe, untreated, what the disease would do to the human body over decades. They were never told they had syphilis. They were never treated, even after penicillin became the standard effective cure for the disease in the 1940s. Doctors withheld the cure on purpose to keep watching what would happen if the men were left to get sicker. The study didn't quietly wind down. It ran for 40 years until 1972, when a whistleblower leaked it to the press. By the time it ended, dozens of men had died from syphilis or its complications, wives had been infected, and children had been born with congenital syphilis, all because the people running the study wanted to see what would happen if nobody stepped in. It became one of the reasons modern medical research requires informed consent at all. That rule exists because the government had to be forced by public outrage to stop. In August 1964, the U.S. government told the public that American ships had been attacked twice by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. Congress used that attack as the justification to pass a resolution that dramatically escalated American involvement in the Vietnam War, a war that would eventually kill over 50,000 American soldiers and, by some estimates, over 1 million Vietnamese people. Here's the part that took decades to fully surface. The second attack the government described almost certainly never happened. Internal Navy communications from the time show confusion and doubt among the officers on the ships themselves. Some radioed that they weren't sure they'd even been fired on, that it might have been their own sonar readings and jumpy weather conditions. Declassified National Security Agency documents released decades later, in 2005, confirmed that intelligence reports had been misrepresented and that officials at the time knew the evidence for the second attack was shaky at best and pushed forward with the public narrative anyway, a war that shaped an entire generation, that tore American society apart at home, was escalated using a version of events the government's own internal records suggest it wasn't fully sure had actually occurred. Not every case on this list is a government secret. Some of the most damning ones came from private companies, because it turns out corporations are just as capable of running a conspiracy as any intelligence agency, and sometimes with even more lives at stake. By the 1950s, internal research at major tobacco companies had already established a link between smoking and cancer. Their own scientists knew it. Instead of disclosing it, several tobacco companies spent decades funding studies designed specifically to create doubt, publicly denying any conclusive link, and marketing cigarettes as safe, even doctor recommended, in advertisements. It took lawsuits, whistleblowers, and finally a 1998 legal settlement, one of the largest in U.S. corporate history, for the full extent of what internal company documents had shown for decades to become public record. Executives had known. The industry spent enormous resources not proving cigarettes were safe, but manufacturing the appearance of scientific uncertainty, specifically so the public would keep buying a product they knew was killing people. Now, for the one that's the most recent and the one you might actually remember happening in real time, for years, people who claimed the government was secretly collecting the phone records and the internet activity of ordinary citizens, not just suspected criminals, but essentially everyone, were treated as fringe conspiracy theorists, tinfoil hat stuff. In 2013, a national security agency contractor named Edward Snowden leaked a massive trove of classified documents to journalists. What they revealed was a global mass surveillance program built with the cooperation of major telecom and tech companies that collected data on the communications of millions of people, most of whom had never been suspected of any crime. The government didn't really deny it. Officials publicly confirmed major elements of the program Snowden exposed, and it triggered actual legislative reform, including changes to how the NSA was legally permitted to collect bulk phone data. The exact thing people had been mocked for, suggesting for over a decade, turned out to be smaller in scope than what was actually happening. So here's what's actually unsettling about all 6 of these cases, and it's not any single one of them on its own. It's the pattern. Every one of these started the exact same way. Someone raised the possibility, and they were dismissed. Not investigated, not debated, seriously just dismissed, often for years or decades, as paranoid or unreasonable. And in every single case, the thing that finally proved it wasn't paranoia, wasn't a leak of speculation. It was paperwork, declassified files, whistleblowers with documents, legal discovery in a courtroom. Somebody somewhere kept a record, and eventually that record got out. That's actually the important distinction here, and it matters. None of this means every conspiracy theory is true, The overwhelming majority aren't, and treating every unproven claim as automatically credible is its own kind of mistake. What these 6 cases actually prove is something narrower and honestly more useful, that the line between outlandish theory and documented historical fact isn't determined by how crazy an idea sounds. It's determined by whether the paper trail eventually surfaces, which raises an uncomfortable question to end on. How many of today's insane theories are just sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere, 30 years away from a Freedom of Information request that finally proves them right? We don't know yet. That's kind of the point. If this kind of thing is what you actually want more of, hit that like button and drop a comment telling us if we should keep going deeper. We're listening. Every case in this video is drawn from official declassified records and public court settlements. If you want to check any of it yourself, all of our sources are linked in the description box below this video.